he was such a real person, and he had so much fun. I'll never forget the times in the conferences that we had together at Camp in the Woods, Colorado State. I remember one time at Camp in the Woods when we were probably 7 years old, right when I was meeting Zack, right when you guys moved there. I was a big Florida State football fan, still am. We were watching the game, and they came back and won in the fourth quarter. And you would have thought that was Zack's favorite team, and he was going nuts. And we ran outside, and Zack jumped in a puddle, and he was just lying face down in this puddle, like flailing his arms around, and celebrating harder than I was because he was so excited for his friend that I had that. So just the fun that Zack embraced, the spirituality, the fact that he got it, that times when we were in Colorado State and we would want to go play basketball, sometimes we'd go see him and he'd say, hey guys, I just need like an hour to spend with the Word. At 11 years old, you don't see that with kids who just want to go read their Bibles. So we've all gone through this in different ways, obviously. And we've all learned something from it, but what I miss most about Zack is having that example. I coach a high school basketball team now, and I'm always thinking, what are some of the things that I want to impress upon these kids? And they're the same age that Zack and I were when the accident happened. And a lot of times it just means talking to them about Zack, about teaching them about the tenets that Zack embodied, and trying to form these young men into the type of young man that Zack was. I know even one kid can turn out somewhat like Zack was. I mean, what a better place the world would be. We've seen it all here, all these people coming out. So thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for the opportunity to share.
Mostly I want to thank you all for being here today and for being here for Zack and our family for the past 6 years. So thank you. And I know there are a few people here that I really want to hear from, and I hope they'll find a way to speak up at the next event that we're about to go to. A little less than 6 years ago, our family, minus Zack, gathered together in the gymnasium of BBNN for a prayer vigil. Zack had endured his second brain surgery within 1 week and was just beginning to come out of a drug-induced coma. It had been quite a week. Chelsea came in the night before, and earlier that day I remember leaving the hospital to get lunch and dropping both Chelsea and Tammy off at the door of a restaurant while I went to find a place to park. I remember that as soon as they both got out of the car, I began to cry. I actually was wailing. I was deeply, deeply saddened like never before by all that had happened in the week. And when I showed up later that night, the organizers of the vigil asked if I wanted to say anything, and I said I didn't think that that probably would be a good idea. I was feeling a little emotionally thin, but that I would give them the nod when it came to that point in the program for us to speak if I changed my mind. And that night was a very special night. The MC was great. Someone sang us a couple of Zack's favorite songs. We prayed, and then there were some incredible tributes to Zack, including one by his lacrosse captain, Mike Hanafy. Mike said a couple of very provocative things. First, he said that even though Christian theologians say that every human being is born with original sin, that Zack was one exception to that. He was just too nice of a guy. And second, he told the story about sitting next to Zack on a bus ride to a game. And Zack had fallen asleep while he was reading his Bible. And when the Bible fell down, Mike picked it up and found that Zack was actually reading from the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus shares the Beatitudes. Mike went on to read the Beatitudes, including the second one, which says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." Those two comments evoked a response from me, and so when the MC looked over to me to see if I wanted to say anything, I said yes, or nodded yes. First, I stood up and set the record straight by assuring everyone, as only a father or a mother can do, that Zack definitely had original sin. And that he actually would be the first to tell you that. In fact, he did, as Donnie mentioned just a few days earlier when he was baptized, to get up and confess some very specific sins. Second, though, I made a comment about the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Saying, what a strange oxymoron, that there can be blessing, or how happy are those who are sad, for they shall be comforted. I'm sure that I still have a lot to learn about what Jesus meant by those words, but I feel like I had already begun to learn that day and experience the truth of what it means, blessed are those who mourn. One thing that I'm sure he did not mean by that was that people who mourn are happy because suffering and loss are really not losses, and they're really not painful. I had never felt the feeling of sorrow and pain that I felt earlier that day, letting Chelsea and Tammy off at the restaurant, or the feeling of sadness that I woke up with earlier that week when I began to absorb the news that Zack would likely have significant speech deficits. I knew how much he loved to sing and how much he loved to give speeches, and he was quite good at both. And I know how painful it was every time that I've had to say goodbye to Zack and leave him at a residential school or home for disabled children or people. Now, blessed are those who mourn does not mean we are happy in our sorrow because our sorrow is not real, or our losses are not real, or that pain and sadness are not real, or they're not deeply felt. What I had experienced that day, that week, and countless times since was a deep feeling of peace, consolation, comfort, yes, even joy and blessedness in mourning and grief that came from two sources. One, I found that blessedness comes from God and from being drawn by my experience of suffering and grief into a deeper understanding of my own Christian faith. Earlier that day when Chelsea and Tammy got out of the car and I lost it, I was immediately overwhelmed by a thought that I was crying out to a God who endured the suffering and loss of his own son. He was not a distant God to me. At that moment, and I cried and I wailed before the Son of God, a crucified God who had stepped into a world of suffering in order to save us from it. There really were, second, I found that the blessedness, this deep feeling of consolation and even joy or peace, can come to us in mourning and grief through people made in the image of God. There really was only one time in this journey where I felt panicky and on the verge of a nervous breakdown. It's about 3.5 weeks after Zack's brain injury that he had to get a lung surgery, and I don't know if compassion fatigue had set in on our community yet, but I do know that the fatigue of being the object of your compassion had set in on us, and we were trying to get all of you back to your lives. As a result, we were all alone in the hospital waiting room on that day, and Zack's 1-hour surgery turned into 2 and then 3, and at that point I began to panic like I never have in my life, fearing the absolute worst. It was honestly the most horrible hour of my entire life. But it also, that experience gave me a glimpse of the enormous amount of comfort that God has brought to us through you and this incredible community of friends that surround Zack and have surrounded us. So the second way that I've come to experience the true blessedness of those who mourn is that mourning can bring people together to console, to validate feelings of sadness and loss, to remember and to give hope. Those feelings of love go right to the heart, I believe, of what it means to be a human, what it means to be made in the image of God. Which brings us to this moment here and why we've done this. Thank you for being here today to remember and to mourn some of the losses And I trust you, like me, are looking forward to turning the corner and being with the one that we all love and who has brought us so many gains. So that's next. But before we do that, I'll turn it back to Spud.
For Zack's love for family and friends, and for those on the margins, we give thanks. For Zack's mischievous streak. For Zack's ability to turn a compliment back on the person who gave it. For Zack's athletic ability and his love of sport, the game, his teammates, and his coaches. For the depth of Zack's love for Christ, demonstrated in worship, prayer, and service. For memories made and lost. For words that must now go unsaid. For relationships that have changed his family and friends. For lost hopes and shattered dreams. For our worries and fears for Zack and the McLeod family. For the abiding presence of Christ in suffering. For the profound spiritual presence and deep joy evident in Zack after his accident. For the incredible medical staff and those hidden moments that have kept Zack alive. For Zack's ability to lift others with a smile, a hug, a thumbs up, a high five, or a secret handshake that only he knows. For how Zack's life has changed and how our lives have changed in seen and unseen ways. Now may the God who suffers with us in our weakness, who dries our tears with promise, and who is able to offer hope in our despair, take care of you, watch over you, and give you grace. Amen.
It's our privilege to welcome you to this event. My mind is not, I wrote down a couple things. This won't be long, trust me. Mostly I just want to communicate our gratitude to every person here. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for being with us for especially the last 6 years of life. And a special thanks to those of you here who made this event and the event that preceded it possible. Today is actually not Zack's birthday. Tomorrow is Zack's birthday. But this day does fall between his birthday, which is the celebration of his life, and the anniversary of a tragic near-death accident that changed his life. And Zack, I want to say to you that your life has, as our friend Ron said at the where we were earlier, your life has showed all of us the hard edges of beauty and suffering in this world, and how your faith in a personal God has helped you to walk and in fact has often carried you through both of them.